In an old forgotten house on the edge of a gloomy forest, which people avoided, lived a woman named Emily. She was alone. Having lost her husband and son in a terrible accident, she moved to this house in search of peace and solace. The locals steered clear of this corner of the world, whispering that the house was cursed. They said something terrible had happened there long ago, and that the house was tied to something dark, something incomprehensible. But Emily, worn down by grief, didn't believe in such legends. She thought that only here, in solitude, could she escape the pain of her loss. The house was old but sturdy. Large windows were covered in dust, and old furniture stood in the corners, like forgotten witnesses to past tragedies. The walls, though stained by time, still held a certain grandeur. It was cold inside, but Emily felt that this place, despite its age, somehow warmed her loneliness. The silence around her was thick, like a heavy blanket, and it seemed unnatural. But there was no room in her heart for fear, only the aching feeling of loss and longing. The first few days passed quietly. She cleaned the house, tidying up the abandoned rooms. But soon, as the evening silence grew especially dense, she began to sense something strange. Every night when darkness fell, she heard sounds as though someone was walking around the house. At first, she thought it was just the creaking of old boards beneath her feet, but soon the sounds grew too distinct to ignore. She could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, as if someone was pacing through the house, watching her. One night, Emily woke up to a sharp noise. She leapt out of bed and peered into the darkness. In the doorway stood a figure. It was short and distorted, as though it was out of place in time. But there was no sound, no movement. The figure didn't advance, it just stood there, like a shadow frozen in the emptiness. Emily tried to scream, but her voice didn't come out. The silence was suffocating, as if her scream had been swallowed by the night itself. After a few seconds, the figure disappeared, vanishing into the air. Emily remained sitting in the dark, her heart pounding in her chest, unable to comprehend what she had just seen. She couldn't forget that gaze, that dark silhouette, but she didn't dare tell anyone what she had witnessed. Instead, she buried her fear deeper inside, hoping it had just been a nightmare, hoping her mind had cracked under the weight of her isolation. In the following days, the strange occurrences continued. Every night, she would wake up, feeling as though someone was close by. Sometimes her belongings would disappear, only to be found in other parts of the house, as though some invisible force had been moving them around. Windows, which she had left closed, would be found open in the morning. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror, though unchanged, started to appear strange. Each time she looked at it, her own face seemed distorted. The lines of her chin were too sharp, her eyes too large, her face almost like a mask. Sometimes it seemed as though someone was standing behind her in the reflection, but when she turned around, no one was there. Night after night, the tension in the air grew heavier. Emily began to feel like something was chasing her, but she couldn't tell what it was, a shadow, a sound, or something else. She started to lose track of what was real and what was just in her imagination. Meanwhile, her nightmares grew more vivid. In these dreams, she was always back in that same house, but something was off in every version of the dream. Emily tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move, and her movements were slowed, as if she were trapped in thick, sticky air that couldn't release her. In these dreams, she often encountered the shadow, which became clearer with each passing night. It was a figure resembling her, but twisted, distorted, like it was stretched too far and shapeless. One evening, when fog had enveloped the house, Emily decided to explore the basement, hoping that it might help her understand the feelings of dread that had been haunting her. As she descended the creaky stairs, she noticed the air in the basement was unusually cold, even for the house. There in the corner was an old stone slab that seemed to have been slightly lifted. With some effort, she removed it and discovered a dark, bottomless pit beneath. Peering into it, she felt her heart freeze. From the darkness of the basement, her gaze met the motion of something below. She tried to see what it was, but the deeper she looked, the more she felt her eyes unable to focus on what lay beneath. Instead, it seemed as though something alive was moving in the pit, but it wasn't like any living creature. It became clearer and clearer, and Emily realized that it wasn't just a shadow, it was her own reflection. With horror, she understood that what she was seeing wasn't simply a reflection of her face. It was her.